hi everyone, welcome. This is Lorraine Ramirez of the Neighborhood Funders Group. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, From Sanctuary to Freedom, Cities in Resistance. A special thank you to all of our speakers. We have opening comments from Alex from the California Endowment, and then Council Member Greg Casar from Austin, Texas. We have Rachel DeCruz from the Center for Social Inclusion, Lizette Chacon from Colorado People's Alliance, Kimmy Lee from Bay Resistance, and Carl Lipscomb from Black Alliance for Just Immigration. So again, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. I'll say a little bit about NFG, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So the Neighborhood Funders Group is a membership association of grant-making institutions. Our mission is to build the capacity of philanthropy to advance social justice and community change. NFG organizes the field, develops leaders, and cultivates thought leadership among its national base of members, and encourages the supportive policies and practices that advance economic, racial, and social justice. Now, do you want to say a little bit about the Democratizing Development Program, which is the main sort of organizing force behind this webinar?
Yeah, so my name is Niall Malloy. I'm Senior Program Manager at NFG on the Democratizing Development Program. And the Democratizing Program primarily works with funders and community stakeholders on issues of inclusive, democratic, and equitable community development. We've been working with funders who believe that any funder investment in community change must hold community at the center. So I'm really excited about this call. Thank you, Lauren.
Great, thanks, Niall. And I'll say a bit about Funders for Justice, another initiative at NFG that also helped organize this call. So I'm the Senior Program Manager for Funders for Justice, which is a national network of funders, including grant makers, affinity groups, and donor networks that are increasing resources to grassroots organizations addressing the intersection of racial, gender, and gender justice, community safety, and policing. So just a couple of reminders and tech reminders for this call. If you could go to the next slide, Shannon. If everyone could make sure to put their own phone on mute. I know it can be very confusing to use the webinar's mute system, so we just ask folks to use their own mute on their phone. Then we also, today, here's the call-in information. And remember to sync your audio to your video if you haven't by locating the italic blue eye on your upper right screen within the webinar and clicking the down arrow to locate your identity code. Once you locate your code, please type it in using the keypad on your phone. And then again, please remember to mute your phone. Next slide. So I'd love to turn it over to Alex Suttles, the Program Manager at California Endowment and a member of our Democratizing Development Program. Alex.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Alex Desatel from the California Endowment, and I'm really happy to be here today. I really want to appreciate the NFG staff, especially Lorraine and Niall, for the work that they did to pull this together. As Lorraine mentioned, this idea for this webinar, or just kind of diving in deeper around the idea of rebel cities, surfaced last fall at a Democratizing Development work group meeting, which I had the opportunity to be at. And I really appreciate the NFG staff for taking it from that idea to getting us here today. As Niall mentioned, the Democratizing Development work group is really focused on creating more equitable places where everyone can have the potential to rise and grow to their full potential. And a lot of what we were talking about is really how do we invest in the people in places to have a voice in how the places develop. And then the election happened, and it really introduced this new idea of the rebel city into our discussion. And as the California Endowment, which is focused on promoting the health and well-being of Californians, a healthy place is, we know that healthy places are really important for individual health, and that places free from fear are critical. And so this idea of a sanctuary city is really important to the work right now. And I just want to lift up that the frame that the Democratizing Development Work Group and NFG overall brings to this work in terms of thinking about the grassroots organization's role in creating sanctuary cities from the ground up is really critical, both in terms of developing that accountability for our elected representatives to make sure that our cities are safe for all people and free from fear, but also in thinking about as residents are being engaged in that civic engagement to respond to this threat to safety and to our collective humanity, really then providing on-ramps to move people from responding in this moment to growing a movement so that we can all be free. And I think it's the panel that we have lined up today is really going to be able to speak to what is happening to make sure both to respond to the threat but also to grow the movement. And I really look forward to hearing more about what the innovative strategies that people are using. I'm also really excited to have representatives from government on the line and talking more about the ways that we can support those who are working more from the inside to push back and resist this agenda of fear, and really how we can work together to have strong inside-outside strategies will be a very exciting part of this call. So I really look forward to hearing more from the presenters on those concepts. And then I just want to say that if you find this webinar useful and are interested in going deeper on this topic or other related topics, hopefully you can reach out to me or Niall or Lorraine or anyone else who's involved in the work groups. We would love to have more people involved in thinking about how to support this work more effectively together. And so with that, Lorraine, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Alex. I wanted to give one more thank you not only to our speakers, but also to GSER, Grant Makers Concerned with Immigrants and Refugees, who helped think through this webinar in its early planning stages as we share interests and commitments to immigrant communities and all communities of color, and wanted to really, again, say thank you to GSER. And then before we turn it over to speakers, just to say the agenda today will hear first from the councilman and then from Rachel, and then let's pause for a couple questions. So if everyone could just go ahead and start asking the questions that you have as we go in the chat box in the lower right-hand corner. That'll help us queue up the questions for the short break that we'll take for Q&A, and then we'll turn it back over to our speakers and hear from Lizette, Kimmy, and Carl, and then we'll open it for full Q&A, and then now we'll share some next steps at the end, which includes how we'll continue this conversation and hopefully collaborate and strategize together. But again, Neighborhood Funders Group is really member-led, member-driven, and all of that starts by engaging each other and our field partners. So please do send questions as we go. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Greg Bassar from Austin, Texas.
Hi, everyone. This is Greg. I am, as it obviously says here on the screen, a council member in Austin. I was first elected in 2014 and recently re-elected to my second term. Before being on the city council, I was a community organizer at our local worker center, which is a Center for Popular Democracy partner here in Austin, and actually helped recruit some of our council members before I was on the city council to local progress as it grew. My city council district is the most immigrant part of the city and was the center of the most public ICE arrests and ICE sweeps in Texas here in this last month. And so we've been dealing with a lot of that here locally, but being able to connect with local progress members has been really, I think, an important part of as a city council member, feeling like I have a role and can sort of survive and do good work in this really difficult moment. So as an introduction to local progress, which I think has some info on it on the next slide, for those of you who aren't aware of our work, we're an organization of over 500 local elected officials. I like to think of us in many ways as sort of the anti-ALEC in that right-wing power is so concentrated in state legislatures, but the vast majority of cities, and large cities in particular, have some amount of significant progressive, if not just liberal power working there. And so it's a network and organization where we can have not only shared policy expertise, but organizing of local electeds across cities. And then I think part of what's really special about Local Progress as an organization is the way that we can coordinate inside and outside strategy campaigning, so that we're not just organizing amongst power brokers in elected office, but indeed building the power of grassroots organizations on the ground in our individual cities and across cities. So in the sanctuary movement, in particular since the election, Local Progress members have spearheaded resolutions or taken bold stances affirming or even creating new protections for immigrant communities in dozens of our cities and school districts, from big to small, urban to rural, across the country. Our members in Santa Clara are suing the Trump administration, and many others of us are exploring legal strategies to fight back either against our legislatures or against the federal government. And many of our cities are going beyond sanctuary policies to sort of freedom city policies, is increasing funding for legal defense for low-income immigrants, exploring opportunities to replicate what's happening in New York with the Immigrant Family Unity Project, providing access to council programs in cities from Chicago to San Francisco to Washington, D.C., and recently here in Austin, and just doing work to continue to fight back against the criminalization of our communities that and that criminalization, as we see, is being continuously utilized to justify the deportation of significant numbers of our constituents. We are working to connect local electeds in this moment to build a shared strategy and to have really critical state fights, especially in places where Trump-aligned states are trying to prevent our sanctuary cities from existing as sanctuary or from expanding. We are working together with the Speaker of the New York City Council to hold a convening of our members March 27th and 28th in New York to continue to do the work to share policy and legal expertise on sanctuary issues, but then more, I think, just as importantly, build a shared strategy across cities on how we're going to address this, be this in big or small cities in red or blue states. I think that work is really important from a local elected official perspective, because so often we are having the humanitarian needs in our individual municipalities being pit against the larger movement needs, because here in Travis County, for example, Travis County is the county in which Austin's located. We did years worth of work to get rid of our sheriff and get a new sheriff who put in place a very strong sanctuary policy for our county jail. And our governor cut $1.5 million in grant funding to our county for things like addiction recovery, veterans court, PTSD recovery services in the criminal justice realm, hurting many of our constituents and pulling away some very important services. And that's just a small example of how feeling alone and feeling like maybe we should change course in order to protect our constituents can get pit against the larger movement if we're not connected to organizations nationally and cities and counties nationally that are putting together a strategy for us to not give in, even when we're facing extreme pressure and sometimes pain from other levels of government if we continue to sort of stand in solidarity with that movement. And so I think what's happening in Austin is a good example of why this coordinated national work is so important, especially coordinating not just in the coasts, but also inside of red states. In Texas, there is a bill that has already passed the Senate, and now moving over to the state house to ban discretion of police officers from investigating immigration status. So it's kind of the evolution of SB 1070. It does not exactly cross the lines that SB 1070 crossed, but manages to toe up all the way to the edge of them. Also, that bill would make immigration detainers, which have regularly been shown by the courts to be voluntary, to make them mandatory in the state of Texas. And the enforcement penalties include criminal penalties for elected officials like myself that endorse such policies. And those criminal penalties, they want to utilize those to actually utilize clauses in Texas law to remove elected officials from office, and major defunding of cities and counties that refuse to comply with this new bill are included, to the tune of tens to hundreds of millions of dollars for some major cities and urban counties. And so we're facing those sorts of serious threats. So a national strategy on litigation and legal defense from those sorts of bills, a strategy where we can collaborate to make sure there's legal defense for constituents who are in immediate humanitarian need from the raids is critical, and not feeling alone and actually feeling like we're part of a coordinated strategy, I think, has been really crucial, and that's really where I see local progress fitting in, and why I look forward so much to the work that we're going to be doing at the end of March to bring people together from across the country to deal with those issues.
Great. Thank you, Councilman. And I know that you have limited time with us, so I really want to encourage everyone on the line, if you have questions for the Councilman, to please put them in our chat box now so we can make sure to ask them before he has to hop off in just a little while. And then with that, I will turn it over to Rachel from Center for Social Inclusion.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with all of you today, and thanks to NFG for hosting this webinar. My name is Rachel DeCruz. I'm the Racial Equity Project Manager at the Center for Social Inclusion. We are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to catalyze communities, government, and other institutions to dismantle structural racial inequity and create equitable outcomes for all. And we do this by crafting and applying strategies and tools to transform our nation's policies and practices in order to achieve racial equity. So part of my role at CSI is to work with and support the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, or GARE, which is helping to build the field of practice to advance racial equity both within and through local government. And GARE is currently working in 100 jurisdictions in 30 states. We have over 30 members in the GARE National Membership Network. In many ways, we see local government as really being the first line of defense to protect our communities from threats at the national level. So I'm happy to be able to share some highlights and information from two of the jurisdictions that are currently part of the GARE network and share with you how they are kind of organizing in this moment. You can advance to the next slide. So King County, Washington, a jurisdiction of 39 cities and some unincorporated areas, and serving a total of around 2 million people. In 2015, the county passed an ordinance saying they won't honor immigration and enforcement detainers anymore with ICE, and they also signed on to, onto a network declaring themselves as a welcoming county at that time. In response to the executive orders, the other week, King County also established a $750,000 one-time rapid response fund to meet immediate critical needs that they're seeing in the community. And that fund will be directed in 3 different areas. The first is to help establish a legal defense fund, which is going to provide pro bono guidance on the naturalization process, as well as to those fighting deportation. The second is to develop and distribute Know Your Rights material and trainings throughout the county so that immigrants and refugees know what to do if they're approached by federal agents or are victims of a hate crime. And then the third is to strengthen information and response hubs operated by nonprofit organizations so that everyone in King County knows where to go for resources, alerts, and opportunities. And so this money will be going to community groups, coalitions, and networks that are doing incredible work on the ground. Some of the organizations are community-based organizations really working on a shoestring budget, so offering this kind of financial support is going to be a big help to them. And so the county has been using these strategies to support philanthropic partnerships to help fund these efforts in the communities that they're working with. And 2 foundations have already aligned with their strategies and are supporting the community groups that the county is also supporting. In addition to that, King County has created posters, flyers, and pledge cards around the theme of All Are Welcome Here, which are being used in clinics, service areas, and they're also being shared with other cities. And those are available in 8 different languages. And they also have the Inclusive Communities Pledge, which about 80 elected officials in King County have signed on to help ensure that the county isn't denying services and is also supporting immigrants on a pathway to citizenship. In addition, final point on King County, they are also offering technical assistance support in passing sanctuary and welcoming city ordinances, laws, and resolutions to other areas within the county government. You can move on to the next slide. Great. Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville classifies themselves as a welcoming and compassionate city. They've got a growing immigrant and refugee community and really want people to feel safe and confident accessing city services in this moment of uncertainty. They have an Office of Globalization, but it's only a two-person shop, so they really rely heavily on partners in order to be able to do their work effectively. So in the aftermath of the executive orders, their main focus was really on affirming city services and pledging to serve immigrants and refugees. So they sent out a memo outlining all of the services they have in the Louisville metro area in multiple different languages. It shared information about their hate crime hotline and also reaffirmed that if an individual uses their services, they're not going to ask about immigration status. So really focusing on dispelling the myth that you needed to share documentation status if you reach out to use city services. In addition, the city hosted a rally on January 30th after the executive order was signed. That's the photo that you see on the left on the slide there. They anticipated having about 1,000 people in attendance, but over 7,000 people showed up, so that helped to send a big message to the community that the city is there to support them. In addition, the city is really working with community partners to get out and be in the community, to attend as many community events as possible, to share information, and to help kind of dispel the myths that I mentioned. They're partnering with local agencies, including the University of Louisville, to make sure that people know their rights and have legal support. Are also working with the faith community to develop rapid response and serve the needs of the community, whether that be supporting children whose parents were detained, identifying where legal resources are available, or even things like getting food and supplies to those that are afraid to leave their home. They're also partnering with the local school district, the Jefferson County Public School District, which declared themselves as a safe haven for students, and are also have been increasing police peace walks in immigrant neighborhoods so that residents are able to know what their local police officers look like, and it's easier for them to tell the difference between Louisville police officers and ICE enforcement. So moving forward, the city is going to be really continuing their long-term plan to integrate and empower the local foreign-born community and to work with local community leaders to understand how they can be of best support immediately while also planning for the future of the city and thinking through what communities need in terms of services and assistance. So overall, a few quick notes in closing. Want to name that a lot of cities and counties across the country are really focused on some similar themes of compiling resources, trying to share information with the community, offer legal support, whether that be know your rights trainings or naturalization and deportation support. Also a big focus on resourcing community-based groups and working in partnership to really ensure that the safety and well-being of the immigrant and refugee population is sound. You know, I think one of the reasons I chose both King County and Louisville was to kind of emphasize that the work is going to look different based on where you're situated and how far along local government is in doing equity work. And so as funders, when thinking about supporting local government, we know that there are places that have much more structure in place around these efforts, like King County, New York, Seattle, San Francisco, LA, and it's important to think about how we can also support places that are a one-stop shop or might not even have an Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, so that we're both supporting jurisdictions that are at the cutting edge of this work while also those that might not have as much resources to dedicate. I will end there.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, and with that, I'll just pause and say, does anyone have any questions? I'll turn it to Niall to ask a question, but I don't see any in the chat box. I would definitely encourage everyone who's listening to go ahead and take a moment to send us a question in the chat, and I think the vast majority of the folks that registered are in the chat. So if you're only called in, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question now. But if you're signed into the webinar, I hope you'll ask it in the chat question. Niall, did you have a question on hand? Have you received any?
No, I have not received any direct questions, but I do think it's one question I had in terms of local progress and CSI, obviously hearing a lot of the technical assistance support from community to the government level. I just wanted to put out, since you're both on the call, like how have you two been working together, and have you been aligning strategies and looking at, building more resource capacity around the issues that you've been working on? So I'm just really curious about that. As the council member mentioned, strategy sessions that are upcoming. I'm just curious around like how is that linked to a broader movement, or is that still connected to just local progress work? So that's kind of like that question I was thinking about.
Well, I think a key part of what local progress has done is to make sure that we are, since we're affiliated with and really an offshoot of the Center for Popular Democracy, which counts as its members grassroots organizations, and in particular immigrants' rights and workers' rights groups across the country, is that we, generally are not coming up with this strategy on our own. We are working to make sure that the national strategies of immigrants' rights organizations are moving forward. And so that's usually a good way for us to remain really well grounded in that work while working with, the same sort of policy think tanks and technical assistance groups nationally that those same Center for Popular Democracy partners are working with. So I'm not sure if that answers your question entirely, but I think from to make that a little bit more concrete, here in Texas, we have the Workers' Defense Project, and that they are composed so much of directly affected undocumented immigrant workers that as we try to decide what risks to take, we aren't taking those risks without consulting really directly with community groups whose members are directly affected by us watering down our policy and not standing up and fighting for them enough, but also are directly affected by the backlash and side effects of our state or our federal government lashing back. And so, and I think that when we elevate that to the local progress level, you're talking to local elected officials that are generally trying to work very closely with those same sorts of partners.
Great, thank you.
I can just add really quickly that.
No, go ahead.
This is Rachel. I was just going to add really quickly, I think our strategies are pretty complementary. The majority of folks that are engaged in the GARE network aren't actually, while we do have elected officials represented, it's mostly government staff and support that are working with elected officials, so kind of making sure that there are organizations that are supporting both, knowing that they have different needs.
Great.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have a question from Alex, and then we can move on to the next speaker. So, Alex, do you want to go ahead and say your question and come off mute?
Sure. I guess I was just wondering, like either through local progress or some of the work through GARE, have there been any like networks or more kind of coordinated efforts across different places, especially across state lines, to think about strategies to push back? You mentioned the lawsuits and things like that. Like, are there ways that these activities are being coordinated across different places to push back against any of the penalties that the Trump administration is threatening to impose for sanctuary places, and any other further actions that that places end up resisting?
Rachel, why don't you go first?
Okay, great. Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. Through GARE, we have convened what we're calling a rapid response working group, which is to do just that, to be able to elevate policies and strategies that are working and to kind of share peer-to-peer in an effort to kind of help ensure that organizations are learning from the lessons that people are learning on the ground, as well as being able to elevate strategies that are working well in jurisdictions. And so actually last Friday, we held a webinar where we elevated 6 different local jurisdictions across the country, and they shared the strategies that they're employing in their areas, so that folks from across the country were able to call and listen into that and hear the different strategies that are moving across the country to see what pieces make sense given their local context. And that group will continue to meet and share. A big part of what we're doing is resource sharing to be able to make sure that everybody has access to all the resources they need to kind of understand what's happening in our country and how they can respond most appropriately.
Great. Thanks, Rachel.
And I would add that on the local progress end, we are again, having a national convening in March and working on regional convenings thereafter to make sure the local electeds are organized and organizing alongside their partners. Of course, we're having discussions about planning and strategizing for national litigation as the Trump administration continues to roll out their enforcement policies. And then finally, I would say that in many ways, Texas has been and is right now sort of an experimentation place for the right to accelerate the deportation machine. But at the same time, that means we can be the place of experimentation for what resistance looks like, and to let folks in other states know where this is coming to, what has worked and what hasn't, and what we're trying, and to get support in that way. So at once we're trying to plan nationally on the Trump administration side, but on the other hand, we do have so many states that are dominated by folks that are aligned with the Trump administration, and so we're trying to plan that out. And then finally, of course, in many ways, apart from just the convenings, be they national or regional, we have a few key council members that are in this really deep, and we feel lots of informal phone calls and conversations from elected officials from across the country who are just trying to figure out how to even get started on this work in this time. And so that work is also really important.
Cool. Wonderful. Thank you both. So I'm going to turn it over to our next section of speakers now. And really, next we'll hear from 3 community-based organizations that work at the local and national level. And we really thought it was important to bring all of these folks together on the call to think about an ecosystem of change, right, and how that it requires government agencies, policy advocates, elected officials, and also a very robust grassroots movement that both identifies and raises and pushes the needs of communities most impacted, in this case immigrants and communities of color, but also to hold folks accountable in government and really to vision a bigger and brighter future. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Lizette Chacon, from the Executive Director of Colorado People's Alliance.
Thank you so much for having me. So again, I'm Lizette Chacon. I'm the Executive Director of Colorado People's Alliance. I'm going to start a little bit by just sharing a little bit about who we are. So we are a racial justice, a member-led, multi-issue organization here in Colorado. We started out in the fall of 2015 out of the union of 2 longstanding organizations, one of them being Rights for All People, which was a grassroots immigrant rights organization that had been around for about 20 years in the Denver metro area, and the second one, Colorado Progressive Coalition, which was a statewide multi-issue organization that similarly had been around for about 19 years. The reason why we brought these 2 organizations together was because we were clear that we were not winning and that we were not building enough power for our communities. So we decided to create Colorado People's Alliance to be able to work to build power with those who are most directly impacted by the issues, and to be able to win on the things that are most important for our communities. We work on 4 different areas. We work on climate justice, working for clean water and against fracking. So, big fight taking on the oil and gas industry. We work on racial justice. We're doing a lot of work around district attorney accountability and looking at the issues of mass incarceration with the intersections to immigration and private prisons. We also work on economic justice. So last year, we led efforts here in Colorado to increase the minimum wage. And that was our shining star after the election. We won an increase to the minimum wage to $12 an hour by 2020. And this year, on January 1st, thousands of Coloradans received a $1 increase in their paychecks. And we're also working to ensure that public transportation is affordable and accessible to all communities, specifically communities of color and low-income communities. And lastly, we do work on immigration. We're working both at the local, state, and national level to move policy forward that would protect and serve our immigrants. So we're working on driver's licenses and obviously pushing back against anti-immigrant policies at the state level. So part of our resistance work is our work to protect and defend communities includes rapid response, right? Like what happens if there's a raid, and how are we supporting communities fight their own deportation cases. We're doing Know Your Rights presentations. We've been at the Capitol fighting against anti-immigrant legislation, something that we call the Trumpism effect, right? Like there's a lot of legislators that are bringing up legislation that's really anti-immigrant. We also do citizenship classes and so many other things. But we also are moving sanctuary policies in Colorado as a clear form of resistance, but also moving work forward. So just a little bit of background in Colorado. In 2006, Colorado was the first state to pass a statewide anti-immigrant legislation. So SB 90 passed in 2006 with bipartisan support in the state of Colorado. That legislation connected local law enforcement with immigration enforcement, right? So police were acting as immigration and arresting people, and hundreds of our community members were deported or started the deportation process because of SB 90. In 2013, while working with directly impacted communities, working with law enforcement, sheriff's departments, and the police association, we repealed SB 90. And then from that win, we moved into 2014 to eliminate immigration detainers. So Colorado was the first state to, county by county, eliminate detainers from our jails. And now we are in the next phase of a campaign, right? We see this as resistance, but we also see it as we're moving Colorado into the next step and making sure that Colorado becomes a truly welcoming state for everyone in our community through policy. So we are moving forward with a sanctuary policy that will start in Denver, and then we're hoping to make sure that we move that into other cities across the state. And obviously it will look different in different cities depending on the political dynamics in those states. So Denver is key just because Denver is, there's most of our folks live in Denver and the Denver metro area, and it could also have a lot of influence around the state. There's a lot of different definitions about what sanctuary means. And our mayor in Denver has made statements that said, if being welcoming means that we're a sanctuary city, then we're a sanctuary city. For us, as an organization that has a lot of members who are undocumented, that is not enough. We need an actual policy that's going to protect our members from anything that's coming down from the administration. So we set out, with other allies in Colorado, we set out a specific criteria of what we think sanctuary means, because what is sanctuary anyways, right? So for us, a truly sanctuary city will have different components. So something that we're moving forward in Denver as clear demands of how Denver could become a true sanctuary city is no ICE holds. So what that means is that we want to prohibit the Denver Sheriff's Department and from detaining individuals on an immigration and custom enforcement detainer request. So it's often referred as an immigration hold, where you come in, you're suspected to be undocumented, so the jail, the Sheriff's Department will hold you for about 48 hours until immigration can come pick you up so they can put you in deportation process. The second one is no ICE notification. So we want to make sure that the Denver Sheriff's and Police Department do not respond to ICE notification requests. So those requests ask law enforcement and officers to share the release date and location of folks who are perceived or suspected to be undocumented. So the jail will call immigration and tell this person is going to be released at 9 a.m. tomorrow, and they'll be leaving the jail, and immigration is waiting outside for them. So we want to make sure that there's no ICE notification. Third, we want to prohibit proactive communication with immigration. So we want to prevent the Denver Sheriff and Police Department from collecting information related to an individual's place of origin, citizenship status, or immigration status. So sort of like a don't ask, don't tell. And then fourth, we want to honor them to honor sensitive areas. So we want to make sure that we denied immigration agents access to Denver schools, to courthouses, to probation offices, and other sensitive locations. So currently, there's been a lot of cases where people have been going to court here in the city of Denver, and there was one of our attorney allies just released a video where there's 3 undercover ICE agents at the Denver court waiting for people to detain them without a warrant. So what's happening in Denver right now is that ICE is going to the courts, picking up people from the courts and putting them in deportation process. The other thing is that when people show up to their probation meetings, instead of their probation officer waiting for them for that meeting, immigration is actually waiting for them for that meeting. So we want to make sure that all of those areas are being protected and that immigration is not allowed to from being able to pick up people there. And then the fifth one is that we want to make sure that we work with the city to create an immigration legal defense fund. And this one has been the one that has gotten the most excitement from current city council members and community folks. So we want to implement an immigration legal defense fund that would provide help for folks who are going through the deportation process and that are facing deportation, so they actually have the ability to pay for legal services. We all know that going through a deportation process can be really expensive, and people don't have the money to be able to pay attorneys or anything else to fight their deportation. So we want to make sure that this is something that's implemented. So these are 5 points that we've worked with community and other allies to come up with, where we say we don't really know what sanctuary means, and it's interpreted in different ways, but this is what we think a true Denver sanctuary policy will be. So we started to move this forward with Denver City Council and moving to ask for support from the mayor and city council members to move it in Denver. And once we get it done in Denver, our hope is to pass different versions of this across the state of Colorado, so we have a truly protective and welcoming state for everyone in our community, regardless of their status.
Great. Thanks, Lizeth. I'm going to quickly turn it to Kimmy, Community
Hi,
of Bay
everyone.
Rising.
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm going to shift our discussion a little bit because I think for Bay Rising, we're talking about the San Francisco Bay Area. We're part of a movement to build Bay resistance, and so I'm going to talk about that in a second. But Bay Rising is a network of Oakland Rising, San Francisco Rising, and Silicon Valley Rising, and we came together as a regional alliance to really bring the voices of community-led organizations to the table and to really talk about structural racism, economic inequality, and health inequities that are happening in the Bay Area. There's a huge racial and wage inequality happening in the Bay Area, and so Bay Rising has blossomed in terms of trying to figure out a way to really talk about things, because you can't just talk about housing in one city because folks just get pushed out into others. So having this regional strategy has really helped us start thinking about what can we be doing to connect all these different dots. Bay resistance then has come out in terms of a response to Trump's agenda and the election, and Bay Rising is one of the anchors of Bay Resistance. And so Bay Resistance is our new kind of movement building space. We are convening it with Jobs with Justice San Francisco, eBase, which is East Bay Alliance for Sustainable Economies, SEIU, and SF Rising. And so we saw this need because now there's been thousands and thousands of people that have been coming out to different actions, but what we saw was there was kind of a void of a frame and an analysis about what's really happening and why it's happening. And so we thought it was really important for our community organizations to be there and to actually be a voice and lead this movement. So we started Bay Resistance. We had our kickoff with the People's inauguration on January 20th. We had thousands of people come out into the streets. We coordinated it with other organizations that were doing actions. And in this first month of being around, we've got 15,000 people that have signed into our network. We have a rapid response texting system so that if something is happening, we can text out to the large group. And then we also have them on an email blast where then we can send out information about things happening. And basically, in any given week, there's probably 5 or 6 different actions happening in the Bay Area. And so this has been a way to kind of coordinate a little bit, connect folks, and really just, tap into this energy that's happening. At this moment, it's just been so huge. And so an example, though, is like with the airports. Obviously, there is thousands of people that went out to San Francisco and San Jose and all the different airports in response to the Muslim ban. But when we put out a call for immigration, we said, hey, who can come out and help us if there's anything that happens with immigration? We got 2,300 people signed up to volunteer in 3 days. And so now we're like, hey, all these people want to do something. What do we do with them? How do we actually train folks and engage with them? So it's not just a text list. It's not just, hey, show up for this action. How do we actually take mobilization and then bring them into a civic engagement or organizing model? And a lot of our organizations just are not able to absorb all these people. So we are just really thinking about our own kind of movement moment and how to engage and keep folks connected. So we are calling for a mass meeting and training this Saturday, actually, to provide a space for folks to come together. And we're going to do trainings on Organizing 101, just like what does it mean to organize your neighbors, talk to each other, direct action, what does it mean to actually take direct action, what are the risks involved. There'll be Know Your Rights for immigrants and actually Know Your Rights in terms of community rapid response for ICE raids. And so in the 3 days that we posted this, we've already got 800 people signed up to come to this. So we've got 50 trainers that are set to go. We've got just like huge numbers of folks that are really interested in stepping up and trying to do something more. And again, this idea that we are basically creating this mobilization vehicle to help support things that are happening on the ground, but we are talking, are in communication with the legal teams, the ACLU, the local legal networks that are doing the rapid response for immigration. There's different hotlines and processes on that end, and what we see Bay Resistance as, though, is the mobilization arm, so that if something were to happen, we verify it with them, we can send a text out, and we could have hundreds or thousands of people show up to support our communities. And so what's really important for us, like I had mentioned, around having a racial justice analysis, Bay Resistance, there's a steering committee that's been created that is representatives from the people that are going to be the most targeted under Trump's agenda. So we made sure to include folks from the immigration community. We have seniors and disabilities. We've got folks from education, obviously folks from the Arab community. And so really trying to hold that space, and we're working with Surge and a lot of the white anti-racist groups as well to really think about this moment and how we're all working together. And I'll say the other thing that we're doing just to provide space for mobilization is we've been doing weekly actions every Tuesday along with People's Action, and there's been a call for Resist Trump Tuesdays, and that's been a space where hundreds of people have just come out, and again, it's like there's tons of energy at this moment and people want to do something, and so we found that having the weekly actions have given them a space to come out, and then now we're bringing them to this meeting to really engage folks and really talk to them and have them connect back. And in the long run, in terms of Bay Rising's commitment towards civic engagement, our idea is, okay, we're mobilizing all these thousands of people, giving them a good framework for why we're doing this work, and then eventually, get them into the phone banks, volunteer, and actually let's change the electorate and change what happens during the elections. So we also have started to do phone banks and just doing more communication to our communities in between the different actions. So just a lot of stuff moving, a lot of energy, and we just have created this container, though, so that our organizations have a space to engage with folks that just, didn't have a space before. So I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kimmy. And we're about to turn it to Carl, our last speaker, but I'll encourage everyone again to please go ahead and send the questions that you have in the chat box in the lower right-hand corner of the webinar screen so that we can go ahead and turn it directly over to questions as soon as Carl finishes. And with that, I'll turn it to Carl Lipscomb, our final speaker, to talk about freedom foods.
Thanks, Lorraine. Again, I'm Carl. I work with the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, and we are an 11-year-old organization that organizes, advocates, and raises awareness around issues impacting Black immigrants and African Americans in the U.S. We have roughly 5,000 members nationally and 5 offices, New York, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Oakland, and Washington, D.C. One of the reasons that we exist is because Black immigrants are largely absent from the public debate around immigration. When immigrants are portrayed in the media, it's rarely, the face is rarely a Black face. And even within social justice movements, when immigration is discussed or programs are developed, they're rarely developed with Black immigrants in mind. So we work to raise the visibility of the unique issues impacting Black immigrants while also building alliances between Black immigrants and African Americans. 2 of the unique issues that we recognize that face Black immigrants are mass criminalization and harsh immigration enforcement practices. By and large, Black immigrants live in large cities in the same neighborhoods as African Americans. Most of those cities are considered sanctuary cities, such as New York and Los Angeles, and until recently, Miami. But Black immigrants, because they live in communities that are over-policed and subject to racial profiling, rarely benefit from sanctuary policies. Black immigrants are more likely than their counterparts of other immigrant groups to go through the criminal justice system and end up in deportation proceedings. In fact, black immigrants represent only 7% of the immigrant population in the U.S., but 21% of those in deportation proceedings as a result of criminal contact. This is important because many cities that consider themselves sanctuary cities have policies or generally consider themselves sanctuary cities because local law enforcement agencies refuse to cooperate with ICE. They don't share information. They don't issue these detainers. They don't hold immigrants for ICE. But still, black immigrants end up in deportation proceedings. At the same time, many of these same cities are those that have the most atrocious reputations in terms of policing overall, especially within African American communities, and have seen surges of violence in other areas, surveillance in Muslim communities, targeting of Muslim communities, workplace abuses, etc. So a few months ago, I guess a couple of months ago, we met with a few of our partners to discuss how do we expand the sanctuary framework. Bashi, we've been part of the sanctuary movement since we started, but we always had an analysis around the traditional notion of sanctuary has really been watered down from its original intent and narrowed largely by policymakers. So we were thinking about how do we expand the sanctuary frame, and so a group of our members, as well as workers and others directly affected, had a meeting a couple of months ago, and came up with this idea of freedom cities. And the idea of freedom cities as a movement or a framework really looks at how we move beyond sanctuary to policies that protect all marginalized communities in the U.S., policies that protect African Americans, Muslims, LGBTQ communities, trans communities, specifically women, and so forth, from ICE, one, and from the impact of harsh immigration enforcement policies, but also from over-policing and police abuse and violence at the hands of vigilantes and abuses in the workplace. The existing sanctuary policies in most places don't prevent companies from calling ICE. They don't prevent other city agencies such as hospitals and schools from relating to federal immigration officials. So the Freedom Cities framework, through Freedom Cities, we're looking to develop a robust set of programs and policies that truly protect oppressed communities. A few weeks ago, we had our first convening. There were 25 organizations present. We brought on a third anchor, the Ella Baker Center, which at the same time had pioneered this idea of rebel cities, which is very similar to Freedom Cities. And out of the convening, we decided, the 25 organizations that were present decided to come together and to sharpen a framework around Freedom Cities, to begin to articulate demands that fall within the Freedom Cities framework, and to identify key places and points where we could intervene to expand both the sanctuary as a framework, but also sanctuary policies. Some of the initial demands that we came up with included investing in humanity and the planet, meaning how we move beyond the model of uniform policing toward investing in programs that produce real public safety, such as mental health services, restorative practices, and so forth. How do we invest looking to invest in long-term sustainable housing? How do we create hate-free zones or safety zones, working with private entities such as religious institutions and businesses to create actual sanctuary spaces for immigrants, but also other communities targeted by the state. And then just a robust set of other demands, demands around economic justice and workers' rights, demands around the rights of women and trans communities, and queer communities, demands around environmental justice, and so forth. The next steps for Freedom Cities, we're working on a few things. One, we as BAJI have taken on helping to facilitate a set of political education sessions around Freedom Cities. We're going to be hosting a webinar within the next 6 weeks, which we can get information out to everyone on. We've also, and along with the webinar, we've been developing what we're calling a Freedom Cities curricula and concept note. Individual organizations that are part of Freedom Cities have started looking to how they incorporate the Freedom Cities lens into their existing sanctuary or rebel city campaigns. We at BAJI have several active campaigns around divesting from policing and investing in other programs. In New York, we have a campaign called Safety Beyond Policing. We're working with a similar campaign in Minneapolis. And we're starting to incorporate the Freedom Cities language and demands into those campaigns as well. And then we're looking to build out the Freedom Cities movement. So we committed to hosting another in-person Freedom Cities convening in the next 2 months, where we'll expand beyond the initial 25 organizations that were present. And on your screen is where you can get more information about Freedom Cities.
Great. Thanks, Carl. Thank you. So we have just a couple minutes left. Thank you. So Shannon, if you could go to the next slide. And so we wanted to make sure to have questions and answers with our speakers, but we're getting to time. So if folks could still write your questions, because we'd love to make sure to get answers from our speakers, responses, and share them out with everyone. So please do go ahead and send your question, and we'll still have it. I see Tracy Mabry from EPIP is writing a question. Thanks so much. But everyone who has a question, please do send it. But I'm going to turn it over to Shannon. Could you put the next slide up, please? And Niall and I will talk about the next steps. Niall, please go ahead.
Yeah, I see a couple questions in the process of being typed, so if there's anything that comes up, I'll just respond. So maybe the question for the last speaker, Carl, Jerry from Ford asked a question about what's the geographical footprint of the Freedom Cities campaign. And if you could share a little bit more about that information, and then we could talk about next steps and go from there.
Sure. As of right now, the Freedom Cities campaign has been centered on some of the larger cities. So the groups represented were from New York, Boston, D.C., Miami, Los Angeles, San Francisco and Oakland, Portland, Chicago, Seattle. So many of the largest cities in the U.S. were represented. But we're actually looking to, we're looking at more rural areas and smaller towns as well. And we've recognized at that convening that there's almost more of a need in those areas for a sort of Freedom Cities campaign. So that's something that as we expand and as we grow the partnership and the number of groups around the table, that's something that's on our radar.
Right. And I know we're getting closer to time, and I just want to just think about, too, in terms of just like for the questions that are coming up, I'm just going to wait for them. But for everyone that's still on the call, I think one thing that's really critical, this is a series. NFG hoped that this would be a series of conversations that we have with community leaders and other funders and others in the field that are progressing around these issues. And so, as this conversation comes to an end, we want to pretty much open it up for continued discussion within NFG members in the network to talk more detail and to provide additional context. And for those speakers that provided, great presentations, I definitely we should be in touch with you all how the kind of campaigns and the work progress. As we really want to keep people up to speed to what's happening and also how can we be of service to that moving forward. So in terms of the kind of additional resources and next step for NFG, the Democratized Development Program will continue to be working with this through FFJ's work as well, as we see it as a very critical connection point with some of our programming. So I would just say stay tuned for additional webinars or other kind of content. But in the meantime and in between time, I think it'd be important for funders that are on the call to just definitely be in touch with us about specific things that you see that are advancing and in materials and tools that would be of use. So I just want to kind of highlight that. And then also I see a couple other questions. One, I guess one of the questions I was going to ask too, about how can foundations support Freedom Cities framework efforts at this moment, and how do you see the role, and maybe for other speakers too, the role of philanthropy in supporting some of the initiatives moving forward?
Yeah, I can start, and I know we don't have much time. I'm willing to talk to anyone. My email is carl@blackalliance.org. That's Carl with a C. I think beyond resources for local organizing, which is obvious, I think that we can use support connecting with other organizations that are doing similar work, and that you all believe would be interested in supporting the Freedom Cities framework, and who have active campaigns that would lend themselves to a Freedom Cities narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I think in particular, many of you have relationships with elected officials, and so we're always on the lookout for elected officials that would be champions.
Great. And then, Carl, of course, because this is a funder call, I want to make sure that you did not do a pitch, but I want to definitely encourage funders to reach out to Carl to talk about how to provide both all kinds of resources, including a grant resource. So I know Baji and Lasse and the Ella Baker Center are launching this as the 3 core partners, but there's a larger network, right? And so whether it's a local organization in a place or a national organization, I think grants to any of those to support this campaign would be much needed and much appreciated, so stay tuned. So as we move to close out, I want to respect folks' time, but we always welcome people to stay on the line and stay engaged. I'm happy to go over time with folks. But really, at NFG, we talk about education as part of organizing, right? So education to networking with each other, and then ultimately to action. And so we, as Al said, will continue this conversation. This is just the first, and both the Democratizing Development Program and the Funders for Justice Initiative see these conversations as core to the work. So the links you see on your screen are to the Democratizing Development section on our website, where you can get in touch with Niall. And then also a recap of a conversation that Funders for Justice hosted earlier this month called Policing and Criminalization in the Trump Era. And in that call, it was similarly an hour long, and we actually talked quite a lot about sanctuary cities, but from a different angle. So I think along the lines more of the Freedom Cities framework, but also specifically hate-free zones, how to broaden the sanctuary framework to think about sanctuary for all, and be inclusive of trans folks and not just what our beliefs are, but really how the policies, the anti-immigrant policies are making things even worse for trans folks of color and trans immigrants, because in the earlier framework, where there were bad immigrants and good immigrants, right, trans folks were always pushed further and further out, and now that's even worse. And we know that hate violence against trans folks is statistically getting worse every year. Whereas I think we're up to about 5 or 6 deaths already this year. And then, of course, the National Immigration Law Center, which does incredibly necessary national advocacy work for and legal cases, but also works really closely with organizing groups across the country. So I definitely encourage you to check out the call notes at that link, and then a number of resources that are also there from all of our speakers. But I'll close by saying that we'll send out a list of the slides from this call, but a number of resources from our speakers and their contact information, so you can be in touch with them directly. And then the questions, thank you both Jasmine and Teresa for your additional questions. We'll make sure to send them to our speakers and ask our speakers to respond to you, but also I hope to that others will send in their questions and we can begin a conversation. So if you want to be in touch with us and continue this, and really part 2 would be about strategizing with your local funders, right? I know, with your fellow funders. So I know a number of the participants on this call have already moved money towards to supporting sanctuary cities, immigrant rights, and anti-criminalization efforts across the country. That I hope that you all might be looking for how to do that. And I hope you'll stay in touch with us and continue to have the conversation so that we can mobilize and organize each other. And with that, I'll say thank you again to all of our speakers, and thank you to everyone who joined us today, and have a wonderful rest of your week.